So now is your opportunity to ask the questions you didn't get to ask during the last couple of days. We can open it up to broader questions. So as you ask a question, we'll allow as many people as want to on the panel to answer your question. So it doesn't necessarily have to be directed at one person, but you can do that as well. So people can come down and ask questions. Do we have another mic to pass around?
My back is killing me right now. Hi, I'm Reaver. I've made a few comments and asked a few questions over the last couple days. But this is a little geared specifically towards the conversation on music again, but there was a very short mention in your presentation of something specifically about like resonance, about like resonances. In True Hallucinations, one of McKenna's books, he talks a lot about EMR and its potential uses and like resonance and frequency within the psilocybin context specifically. And because you have more experience with ayahuasca and because their particular experiment that they were running involved ayahuasca and psilocybin, I was curious if you could expand on any of that at all, anything having to do with resonance and psychedelics. And he kind of talked specifically about like the resonance of the molecule specifically, potentially having its own specific note for different substances. So he made the assumption that ayahuasca may have its own specific resonance or note that goes along with it. And he, again, expanded on psilocybin more. So I was curious if you've thought about that at all with ayahuasca.
Well, definitely thought about, right? Working with plant medicines, and all of us that do, it's really tricky because when you're speaking publicly, you really want to kind of focus on what's quantifiable a little bit, and then make this distinction between what you kind of know is happening and then what you think is happening, or what, well, you know, of the 1,000 people, 800 had this same experience, right? So that's valid, right? One of the things that's really far out and abstract is what you're talking about, this idea of resonance, right? Like, what kind of experiments and research are we going to do that shows that certain molecules in the body are responding to certain notes? What we look at instead are things like, you know, resonance and entrainment and all those things, like you pluck a guitar string, you know, the A string, and then the guitar across the room also vibrates, right? The speculation is that that's also happening with human beings, right? Yeah, we have this kind of joke in the ceremony when someone's tuning a guitar, we'll say, tune yourselves, right? Because that really is kind of what's happening, right? Yeah, there is this entanglement that's happening, but it's so undeveloped in terms of like concrete language, at least. You know, one of the things I like to say occasionally is we don't have very developed spiritual language in the West to talk about spiritual experiences, right? And for Western minds, understandably, you really want to kind of communicate in a way that most people get, oh, okay, that's what's happening. So me personally, if I can't do that, I typically only talk about it with other people that are having the experience. So even now, to finalize what you're saying, it's like my intuition and from my experience with working with ayahuasca is that that's definitely happening. The reason we chose those two particular instruments, the abuelo, the flute, and the mouth harp, jaw harp, is that in ceremony, those two instruments seem to be the two that most resonate with whatever energy and frequency ayahuasca is working on. Everything else can be going fine. You suddenly start playing those two instruments, everybody's like, whoa! Right? Yeah, so there is something to that, but I don't know enough about it to really speak about it in detail. Anyone else about that? Yeah.
There's two mics there on the floor you guys can use.
So I have something to add on the music part that you had kind of talked about earlier with translating music from Portuguese in the Santo Daime from Portuguese to English so that they can understand. I agree with that, and then there's another part where I think just to add, and I learned this in Anandayeta, there's a particular ayahuasquero that I worked with who did not want English or Spanish songs sung in a particular period of time, usually in the beginning of the ceremony, and then more when people are winding down, then singing those songs. And he didn't want to sing songs that the majority of people could understand, because he had his own reasonings, but then I kind of made it my own through my own research, in that when we are singing songs in a language we understand, we're accessing the left side of our brain. And in the left side of the brain is where our ego is, it's where identity is, it's where we keep time, it's how we can tell boundaries, and we are a very left brain dominant society in the West. And so when I'm in ceremony and I sing songs, I'm fluent in a Southern African language called Sesotho. It's a Bantu language, which majority of people that I meet, 100% of the time so far, do not understand that. Yet, when I sing in that language, medicine songs that I have received, people, they don't understand it at all, but it has a profound effect, right? So I think that there is space for both wanting to create music where people can understand, like you said, you had a profound experience with that, but also that there is something there in wanting to make sure people are more present, because that's the right side of the brain. If you haven't read My Stroke of Insight by Jill Bolte Taylor, I highly recommend it. But that's where presence is, in the right side of the brain, and that's where we process music, and that's where we're able to really be with it. So I just wanted to add that.
Follow-up question, sorry. Tony, do you or other people on the panel, we've mostly been talking about traditional ayahuasca songs or daime songs, and some of the contemporary psychedelic research and therapy that's happening with MDMA and even with ketamine, we're using much different music for those sessions. And people's thoughts on the types of music that are used for those sessions, or Brian, the sort of music that was used in the psilocybin work. Be curious to hear what people's thoughts are, what you think what's the best music? Is there perhaps even unique music that should be used for queer populations, or, so yeah.
That's a loaded question. And going back to my talk, what's important is that the music is adapted for the specific group or person that you're working with. Because we saw the power of what happens. Like, I love what you were saying, the beauty of music shared in ceremony that you don't understand, or just instrumental, is that it bypasses the intellect, right? So you're just dealing with the intention, the emotion, the cadence, rhythm, and tone, all of that. And then all of a sudden, like I said, dear me, I forgive you, that lands in, and it's like, it feels like everything else was a setup for that moment of the thing you did understand, right? So that's beautiful. But the best example I can give to your question, I was leading a ceremony for all Black people, which was the first time that had happened. And I'm doing the ceremony pretty much like normal, although I adapted parts of it so it wouldn't be too foreign to them. But when we kind of got over the intense part that I just know certain music works for in this medicine context, I put on Stevie Wonder, right? And all of a sudden, do, 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 and the whole room went, oh, and all of a sudden, that's the thing that unlocked everything, right? So the music, more than anything else, it needs to be music that works with a particular medicine. What works with ayahuasca doesn't necessarily work with mushrooms or LSD or MDMA, right? But then if you know the person that you're working with, right, the history or the group or an indigenous group, and suddenly you play like an indigenous, whatever tribe, Native American song, all of a sudden, oh my gosh, and then everything really opens up.
I'm just going to make a small reflection upon one experience where music literally put me into a physiological traumatic state. Like, literally the music put me in physical pain because it was a frequency that just messed with me. And I'm just sitting here like, is it like the way it was created, the way it was recorded, or the intention behind it? But all I know is it was like hitting somewhere in my mind, but it was manifesting physically, and I was in excruciating pain while that song was on. So I'm sitting here like, it's really no. no, make it stop. So I just remember it manifesting, and like I actually just went right back into that spot. I'm like, yeah, sound, you got to know your people. So yeah, or just energy, intention, all that fun stuff.
It's not about that, but it is too. It's not about that, but it is to a human. It's not about that, but it is to human. You're a soul in a body. Yeah. It's not about that, but it is to human. So in the ceremonial space, you have to also allow the medicine to enter you and gift you with song in that moment. And you can't be afraid to sing, practice, but when I first started, I sound like I mean, dogs would start barking and I'd be like, really, universe? Like, it's like the neighbor's dog. Like, I was whispering, I wasn't really singing out loud, and like I'm hearing cats and shit. So you have to get over whatever hurdle it is in you that's making you want to use only a playlist or something, and sing from your heart to the people that you're serving. They're not gonna care if you sound like Mariah Carey or whoever. They're not gonna care. They're gonna be like, oh my God, you just really touched me, and and be okay with that. Those are my 2 cents.
Hi, my name is Gia, and this question is for anyone who would like to answer. Well, there's 2 parts. So the first part is, what advice would you give to young queer people of color who are interested in entering the field of psychedelic research? And the second part of the question is, how do you believe we can best make our voices heard in this particular field?
Would you repeat the second?
Sorry. How do you believe we can best make our voices heard in this particular field?
The second question is similar to when we want. When I have observed mainstream society think about its solution building, it tends to be, what do we all put our minds to be one actionable item in it, and that's not it. So not one actionable thing. It's a multifaceted approach, from continuance of underground to strengthening our networks, to fighting the legal front, to pushing for legalization and opportunities of access, but it's all fronts. So it's not just, let's all center our energies just to get it legal. It's like, what about the current occurrences now? And then the same thing with, we don't want to go all the way, everybody go underground, because then maybe the legal front's not being fought. And every other facet too that I may not even be familiar with. So all of them. And it's aligning those with the skills and opportunities and the access to those spaces. So if someone has maybe those writing and legal skills, push that energy towards that direction. If someone's got activation and networking and connection, utilize that skill to do that, and bringing the ideas, like ensuring that those who are available can go towards that. So you wouldn't, the same thing, are you equipped with the tools? You wouldn't want to put an introvert into the networking one because their comfort, let alone other people's receptivity to that comfort. And the same, I'm not a legal person. I don't know if I could fight that fight comfortably. And so multifaceted approach on that second question.
For the first question, so hello everyone. For the first question, I mean, I'm not working in the field of psychedelics. I work with drug policy, and I would like to say, like, follow your passion. But I'm not saying that follow your passion, and I mean, we have to care for your mobility, where you are working, with who you are working. So map the field you wanna work, the people you're gonna work with, talk with people who are already doing the job. So you have really a real understanding about what is the field and what you want. And then you can really make an informed choice and to have a path. Because sometimes people say follow your passion, but I mean, you have to do it. but just be conscious about the whole options you have, all the options you have with the people who are doing the job, what they are doing, what you like it. So inform yourself, look for information, go to the conference. Americans really like this networking thing, and I think this is important. But yeah, I've been in school, and I cannot tell you how many workshops I attended about networking. But what I really learned, that if you really like the people, if you really pay attention in them, it's not like something. It's a skill you can get, but you really have to pay attention in people, because sometimes it's a small line that is giving you the meaning you need. So you have to do it with your heart and seriously. And then I think, and take your time. It's not like a magical pill. Some people get successful and get in the right path, in the right way very quickly. But sometimes it takes more time, and because you have to, you have limits. Sometimes you have our family background. You have a lot of things that are like playing a role for you to take your decision. So just be conscious about all of these and do networking, but real networking. Really care for the people who are working with you and who are doing the job you think is important. And that's my advice. That's what I am trying to do.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm specifically really in that same boat right now myself as a young queer person of color, and spoke about this very briefly yesterday, but not having a very strong academic background, and was really happy to hear after the breakout session, a lot of people come up to me and really resonate with that, because not all the time are we therapists and researchers in the field, but there is still a voice to be heard and a contribution to be made. And we need to talk. That's really what it is, exactly what you're saying. It's so simple, just talk. Get in spaces where we feel comfortable, where we are addressing all of these issues that are very multi-complex. You know, it's very, very complex. And as long as we're fostering the proper conversation, then we're able to express in the way that we need to. And then we can get the answers to the questions that are the most important for us and feel comforted, connected, safe, and then able to go and create and express in that way. So that is, yeah, that's my take on it. That's my feeling.
Is the thing on? Gia, I want to say to you, I'm just starting out in research as a queer as well, and for me, you know, that's queer research as much as there's many different ways of knowing. So I would say to your first question that you've got to that needs diversity in terms of different epistemologies. I want to say that the kind of quantitative randomized controlled trials are only one way of knowing things. And it needs an urgent rethink so that it's to broaden the basis of what we think of as knowledge, and that's a huge battle at the moment. I'm a qualitative researcher. I think there are many ways to get started. So I would say to this person, get started. You know, just get started. It was the same advice Kubrick said to someone who said, "How do I get into making movies? How do I get to be a film director?" He said, "Pick up a camera." You know, and anybody that's taking psychedelics, you know, you're already a researcher. You're researching yourself. Start from there.
So yeah, and to that, I might add, you know, reaching out to mentors and those of us working in the field, and you know, email, phone call. You might get a few no's. Keep asking. Well, do you know someone else who I could talk to or work with? And yeah.
I have a question about, I'm also new in this space, and confronting a lot of anger, sadness, loss, grief, fear around colonization, and some of these sacred medicines and rituals, and also my own loss of my own histories. And so for those of you who are also dealing with that or have dealt with that on your journey, how do you take care of yourselves?
I lean to people like you. Along this line, I sometimes forget that. It's normalized. So how sometimes, let's say I interact with an introvert who says like, how do you handle or decompress from all this activity? I'm sitting there like, dive into some more. But processing is that healthy balance. If you're constantly exposed, the same thing happens with trauma, the same thing happens with inflammation. If you're constantly hitting that like reaction, or if it's from triggered, or if it's re-exposure to anything that's doing that, giving yourself a break. And if that means, what does it mean? You have to find what that break is. So from getting yourself into a circle of community where you don't have to be on guard, where you can feel safe, or you can be able to talk to someone and they get it. So being able to dose yourself, at least at minimum, with familiarity of comfort. That's one thing that helps me. Grounding myself out in nature is beautiful and wonderful when I have access to it. I'm lucky to have a very strong support system, so I understand there are community members who may not have that, and so the different levels is finding what works, and just remembering, like, just thank yourself for getting this far. Like, there's so many times that I constantly am flagellating myself on not doing enough, not getting enough done, not pushing, not impacting. And I remember hearing my cousin, relation cousin, indigenous cousin, Karina Gould, who said, like, not even 2 years ago did much of the Bay familiarize themselves with the word land acknowledgement. Like, yes, all my life I was raised with my mom who, she would do an opening blessing, or they want a native person of the community. So she's been doing that most of her life, and I have been doing it all my life. But the normalization of people actually like, no, we really actually do want to have an intentional connection. Like, what is the truth about this space? And sometimes it is a performance, a quick little, or they're doing a performative act like, oh, let's have a land acknowledgement checklist. We included the Native people. And I'm sitting there like, all right, work. But in that is becoming normal. So looking at that and saying, that is from the work of the community, and that is something that I've been putting into too. So being appreciative of in that moment, because I'm always doing the whole like, can we get better? Can we I want to get over there. Like, when this is normal, when this is no longer an issue, I want to be over there. And I'm always like, not there yet. But actually being able to say like, wow, yeah, this actually, we've made tremendous forward momentum. So reminding yourself of giving yourself that celebration, like that did this. So I'm not fully sure other ways to care about myself.
I would recommend, like, I think everyone here is pretty savvy about their psychology and their needs for, like, mental health wise. I would, recommend going to therapy. I think as providers, we're ironically the least likely to be in therapy. But, I don't want to just say that flippantly. I want to say that in a way that's sensitive to maybe some of the needs you might have. You might find yourself in pretty oppressive structures where resources aren't exactly available for you in a way that caters to your unique needs as maybe a Black woman. And I want to say that, much as you do your research and how to get along with other people and how to like get further in your career as a therapist, you might want to do some research into like what options are there conventionally available for me as a Black woman or as a person of color, a queer person of color. What providers are available as allies for me. And don't be afraid to like try them out. Use your insurance. Understand that healing can also come in many different forms. For me, food is very healing. Preparing a meal has always been part of my culture. I distinctively remember preparing chicken curry with my grandmother. I would, resource the coconut, have it ground up, soak it in water, squeeze it, feel the texture differences in squeeze and produce the coconut milk, and then like grind up the spices with a pestle and mortar. And it's like a whole process and ritual of food prep that was very healing for me. and, you know, find healing in whatever speaks to your soul, be it music, being part of nature, etc. Resource whatever means of healing you can, conventional or otherwise. I'll just stop there. I mean, there are many different options, but I think learning to prioritize self-care is really important because you are a provider and the services you provide varies as a function of your resource. So think of yourself as like a battery. You need to recharge sometimes. And if you're running on low, it's kind of hard to keep going.
Very briefly, I'll say what has been helpful to me is because I'm such a fighter, such a warrior spirit, right? So sometimes it just means, self-care means letting go of being opposite. So I was in a journey with a dear friend who's here in the audience somewhere. I don't want to call anybody out, but doing a high-dose mushroom journey. And I was like, Kevon, who are you if you're not being opposite? It's like, there's nothing here to be opposite again. So, and my whole like fight kind of just dissolved into being relaxed. And what has also helped me is just remembering that I'm a soul in a body. So my spirit, my soul is using this body as a shell to communicate things that are associated with this body's particular lineage and history and cultural representation. But that is not the me that I am. So self-care is remembering that you're actually bigger and beyond any of these identities, and really owning that so that you can allow your mind and your heart and your spirit to actually relax. Easier said than done, but things that have helped me.
Thank you all for your presentations. I've been really inspired lately by the work of Adrienne Maree Brown and other folks who are sort of like reaching out into the future, using science fiction and speculative fiction to like reach out to the future and bring it into the present moment. And I'm curious to hear sort of your most wild, unrealistic dreams of where this work might take you, might take us and in our community.
Anyone?
I think it's pretty wild that Oakland might decriminalize all entheogenic plants and fungi. But with that, if that's not just a dream for a lot of people that may be here or in Oakland, it's going to come a lot of wild work of figuring out how to do that well and maintain safety in the communities, provide education, provide more education than medicine, but really get information out there and have people do this in a smart way that makes this sustainable and that it's not just a dream for other cities that might want to follow. And so I'm thinking about that.
Who's familiar with There There? Awesome. I highly recommend you go to that book. Indigenous Futurisms, or fictional bit, but it's beautiful. And so right when he shared that potential recognition of that kind of future, the same exact thing is what I'm doing here in the Bay Area, becoming a conduit of information, of free resources or services, consulting, because that truth needs to be out there so we can be accountable to the lands that we're on and what we're interacting with. Same thing with the medicines that we ideally can witness as legal. It's still informing the public and the community, to allowing everyone to be the most informed that they can be, to then have the most responsible interaction and accountable interaction with this information. Because majority of the time it's not accountable, not reciprocal, and not knowledgeable. And that's usually where a lot of the abuses occur. And that's from colonization to addictions. When you don't know yourself or you don't know the medicine you're working with, you might not have the healthiest relationship with it on many levels. So similar fight, different content, but the same message.
Something I've been thinking a lot about is the way when we're in our spaces of oppression, sometimes it's really hard to vision and imagine the world that we actually want to be in. How do we actually live those worlds as we're fighting the oppression that we're living in? So a takeaway that I'm having from this conference, and something that I hope we manifest, is creating small little groups of us that want to get together and just co-vision and just create beautiful space for us to just be out there imagining and dreaming and seeing where that takes us.
Along the lines of what Brian was saying, I think in the future to have a decriminalization of all drugs and release all the people that were in prison for drug crimes.
Yeah, and I think with that, integration is going to be such a such a massive part in this. And how can we find ways to integrate these experiences in a meaningful way, because they are so transformative? And I think that's going to include bringing in and combining alternative healing practices like yoga or movement or breathwork. Breathwork was my first experience with ayahuasca. And that integration, I think, really, I actually did a breathwork ceremony before I did my ayahuasca ceremony and had no idea what I was getting into, but it broke me open in such a way that I think it really created space and made room for the medicine to work through me with more clarity and more precision. So I think that's going to be a really important piece in this puzzle. And I look to begin to foster a community that deals with integration and integration training in Philadelphia. So if anybody has any interest in that, I would love to talk to you after.
I think that's a great question. I just speak from my personal experience, and the reason why I continue to do this work despite all the risks that are involved is that my view of a future is that we as a species need to wake up. It is do or die time. The consequences of our style of civilization, both in terms of the oppression of groups over other groups and species oppression over the entire planet, the only way that I see that really changing is a consciousness shift in the human spirit, a consciousness and awakening and a healing, because we all suffer the wounds of that ourselves. No matter where you are, and you're suffering from it in some way, we all are. So that's, for me, that's why this work's so important, and that's personally why I do it. I know it's possible. I know we can wake up collectively, and I know that if we do, there's enough creativity and beauty and brilliance in the human spirit to transcend all these problems and find the solutions and find a new way of living and a new civilization system. I firmly believe that, but it's not going to be any one individual. We need a collective shift. And I don't know anything better for that than plant medicine. So.
I will offer, just to answer the previous question and then combine it with what we were just talking about. This whole notion of self-care seems like a sort of lie or delusion that we tell ourselves, that individually that you can care for yourself if you eat right and sleep. I mean, I don't think you can do all these things, but I have a yoga practice, you meditate, you take care of yourself, you sleep well, that you should be happy, healthy, and well. But the delusion is that you can do that individually, and that we need to do this collectively. So self-care is a collective and common practice that we can fall into each other's arms when we need to be held. And my sense with where the vision goes, I mean, partly my sense is that every time I go to a psychedelic conference, like another little bud sprouts out on the vision tree, and I imagine many of you have your own sort of like sense of what your personal vision or how your vision may jive with a collective vision going forward, or how you might continue your work. I'm a little like, I have a complex feeling about like utopianism and psychedelic utopianism. Having like worked in collective, communal, radical community for a long time, it's like really hard work. There's a lot of trauma in the culture. There's a lot of secondary traumatization that happens. It's really hard work, and I want to like personally sit deeply with I think sometimes people talk about plant medicines in like a completely idealizing way, and some of my colleagues think about transference like to your therapist, but also transference to the medicine, like it's all benevolent and all good and it's going to save all of our save us. And with the sort of state of the global ecology and our deep relationship to how we've structured civilization with structures of oppression of each other and of the planet, I sometimes wonder if the medicine is like just to help us like learn, right? Like if a teacher's not necessarily a savior. And so I'm trying to understand what that looks like for us. And some of that is like in the individual sense, the ego death, like the confrontation with death. But I think oftentimes there's this theme of like the collective death, like our collective death, whether it's 100 years from now or 10,000 years from now. The medicine is asking us to like contemplate what the true self-realization looks like, what's really going to happen with us. And I don't necessarily see that as darker. And maybe it's a bit of mystery mongering. Like I don't know what it means, but my vision is like about that, right? Like the older I get, the more I realize that there are no teachers that hold all wisdom. There are no lovers that have entirely good hearts. Like we all are carrying our shards with us forward, and there's no like completely good place. And I feel like there's so much loss for me in that. But and so my early life visions of sort of a psychedelic sanctuary where like good work happens may still happen, and I hope that comes to pass. But it's changed for me over time, and I don't know how I might address your question in a year's time. So yeah.
So in my wildest dream is that our descendants look back at us as ancestors and say thank you. You know, thank you for dismantling white privilege. Thank you for moving through white fragility. Thank you for decolonizing yourselves. Thank you for connecting to the earth and making sure that we have a future. So I just pray for that gratitude that I can provide that.
All right, any other comments on that topic? All right, go to the next question.
Thank you. Considering that we all work or in some way are in the realm of healing and even recognizing trauma, preventing trauma, especially as psychedelic people, I think we do tend to be more aware of social issues and more compassionate to those, maybe have more capacity for compassion to those. Ariel and Chris both mentioned the shadow today, and I think that's important. I think the psychedelic community as a whole has shadows, and one of those is sexual harm and addressing sexual harm, especially that takes place in the context of psychedelic spaces. And so I want to thank Chacruna for producing their ayahuasca safety guide for preventing sexual harm, preventing. Raising awareness, yeah. And thank you for the feedback that they assimilated, that the community gave to that. And I hope it's a living document and it's ongoing to make it better and better. But that being said, as healers, organizers, leaders, researchers, lawyers, scientists, therapists, academics, as us above ground and underground, and of course, as the queer community, what are we doing to support survivors of sexual harm? What are we doing to reduce and ultimately end it? And until that happens, how are we seeking to confront people who cause harm and hold them accountable?
So I'm so thankful that you're bringing this up. I think this is a really important conversation and topic. And to me, it's also important to contextualize it, that this is not, unfortunately, this is not unique to the psychedelic community, right? What you're saying is, what do we do overall about the issues of consent that exist in our communities and the existence of sexual violence and sexual harm. Because I see that happening in psychedelic communities, but I see that happening in multiple communities, including multiple activist communities that I'm a part of, social justice communities that I'm a part of, and creating systems of accountability, I think, is really important. I have been a part of numerous different restorative justice circles around holding people accountable who have committed consent violations. I think that something the psychedelic community can do is look to those of us that are in the sex positive community to figure out what have we done around consent violations that have existed in our community. So I'm also a sex educator, and I throw play parties. And I do this in the context of consent and in the context of consent education. And so we have had a model. We actually have, there's a consent team that exists in the Bay Area to address issues of consent violation that are happening in the context of safer sex play parties and sex education spaces. And so I'm wondering if there's a way for like psychedelic community to maybe collaborate with us and figure out, can we transition some of those practices into holding people accountable in these particular settings? And I think also we can look to, there's been some pretty big name people that have been called out around this level of sexual violence and level of harassment. And I'm curious, I think if we could get some of those big name people to actually go through a process of accountability, that it would help everybody else to like witness that publicly, to see that type of healing. And I also think, you know, there's sometimes it's like, in order to create a safe space, we literally have to say, you can't be here right now. But I don't want to just kick people out and say, go do this sexual violence in someone else's community. How do we actually have rehabilitation? How do we actually shift and change the whole culture that we're in? Yeah.
I would just like to offer this about that topic. It just keeps happening. I think that we have to be open to have uncomfortable dialogues. And I think that we also have to talk to perpetrators and ask them, what the hell were you thinking? Why did you think that was okay? Do you know that you hurt people? And that dialogue or monologue can be had in a lot of different ways. And I think that a lot of pioneers that are willing to ask those uncomfortable questions are criticized, are scrutinized, they're stepped on, and instead of offering help and another avenue for addressing the situation, what I have seen is a lot of criticism and a lot of put downs and really hurtful behavior. And we are a collective one, and we're not going to get to the bottom of it, if there even is such a thing within a topic like this, if we are divided. That's for sure. And I think that there are a lot of different ways that we can really expose people who are hurt that are hurting others. Because I think we give out of what we have. If we have hurt, we give hurt. And I think that healing comes in a lot of different ways, but number one is we have to have the dialogue. And I hope that we can maybe be forgiving to those that may choose their own way of having the dialogue. If it's not perfect, then it's not perfect. But let's edify, meaning let's offer our own voice to it. Let's add to it versus tearing down, because that's too easy to do, is to tear down something that someone is trying to build for all of us. And we're not seeking perfection, we're seeking loving solutions. That's the best that I can offer, and thank you.
So I want to name a specific resource that exists in the Bay Area when it comes to how do you navigate. I heard you ask the question around like, what do you do for the survivors, and also what do you do for the perpetrators? I'm not sure if you're familiar with an awesome person named Dossie Easton, wrote the book The Ethical Slut, is also a therapist, also on her 70th birthday, talked about psychedelics from the stage of her birthday party. So she has launched an initiative. There's classes, I believe they're either Tuesday night or Wednesday nights, that people who have come forward that are perpetrators can actually go to these classes, and it's like every other. So it's like 1 week is for perpetrators, the next week is for survivors. I was part of the initial dialogue as to how to get those classes started. And if you want more information, come up to me after. I'm happy to connect you to have you be able to go to those classes. And also to acknowledge that, you know, the statistics is something like 1 out of 3 people have experienced sexual violence, right? So that means I'm always curious, like I want to hear the statistics in the reverse, like how many perpetrators exist? Like, is it also 1 out of 3? And if so, that's like a lot of people. That means like people in this room probably, right? Because how else would it work? So I'm really curious to figure out like, how do we hold people in a deep place of accountability? How do we get people into these classes? And how do we how do we hold people and not push people completely out? And also, when it comes to the survivors, I really think it's important to continuously check in, like when is it okay for a perpetrator to come back into community, right? I think part of that is finding out from the survivor, like, how are you doing? Are you okay? How can we show up and support you? What do you need? And to believe survivors, right? Because so often people come forward with stories and they're not believed. And so I think it's important to do the deep work and the deep listening. And yes, like find out from perpetrators what's their experience, find out from survivors, what do you need now? What do you need a year after? What do you need 2 years after? Because that kind of violence doesn't leave people, it stays with people. So doing that checking back in is really important.
I sort of don't want to let this question pass. I know we've got a lot of questions to get to, but without a male voice, because that's often what's missing. So there's a huge plurality of genders in this room, I'm sure, but for any that are, because the perpetrators tend to be male, right? And I think so often that's just missing from the conversation. So I want to shout out to any male identifying people, which I class myself as one, that we've got to be part of the conversation, you know, and it's about men talking to men about these issues and taking, yes, accountability, responsibility and education, but I think that has a power that, you know.
Hi, is there another comment? No, please. Okay. Hi, I was interested yesterday in the pretty much intersections of art, psychedelia, and research, but more specifically today, I want to know how psychedelics have affected your research, because we talk a lot about how psychedelics, you know, have contributed to art, but it may or may not be true that like psychedelics led to our modern day PC and like the iPhones that we have in our hands. So your research specifically.
When I was trying to think of what to do my dissertation on, I was going to do it on child development, and I drank some ayahuasca, and it was the next day I was walking to the train station to go to my school, and I'm sure it was the influence of the ayahuasca that caused me to have the idea to do my dissertation on gay people and ayahuasca. So I think if people take psychedelics, they will be inspired to do psychedelic research.
So I had the great luck of meeting Dr. Bia Labachi in 2006 when we started collaborating more in the area of social sciences, and I was doing ethnographic sort of observational work of substance use, in particular in ayahuasca drinking churches in Brazil. That was one of the main reasons why I applied to go to medical school. Studying substance use in communities is something I learned firsthand drinking ayahuasca in rooms of temples of 150, 200 people, seeing how this could be normative, seeing how this could be done in a legal setting, seeing how this could be done not under the supervision of medical professionals, but seeing how this can be done in traditional ways, taught with lineage, in ways that can be then taught to your children so that they can learn how to do this in a safe space where people feel that they have access to what they are seeking, and hopefully in a way that's not causing more harm than good. And actually, so many people were saying this is causing so much good, I want to bring my grandma. And seeing that in a way that's a shared family tradition and ritual absolutely inspired me to say, all right, this is San Francisco. We have the opportunity to study a psychedelic like psilocybin. Let's do it in a group, because doing that in the community brings so much that doing it in an individual way does not. And I know that just because I've seen it, and I had the great opportunity to get to live that at one point in my life.
The question is around how have psychedelics influenced our research? Yeah. Research allegedly generates evidence, right? And so we have this dominant narrative that we need evidence-based practice, EBP, in all of our, and this is the sort of standard for how we work and treat people. And I think we need to bring a critique, a power critique, a queer and diverse critique to that, because the means of the knowledge generating machines that we have in the world are informed by the funding structures and the funding priorities of organizations that want a particular type of knowledge to be generated. And so the scale of knowledge and research generation in a large pharmaceutically backed, VC-backed pharmaceutical industry dwarfs the sort of scale of information that we're generating through the sort of research we're doing in psychedelics. And even that, is like just a tiny pittance in terms of the scale and scope. It also systematically devalues true wisdom in research, as though we didn't have research before we had randomized controlled trials, as though the wisdom of your mother and father and other elders in your community was not true researched wisdom, that it was not based on fact or experience or had any validity or reliability to it. And so it's frustrating, because in the history of the psychedelic narratives in particular, if you look at the Concord prison experiments, right, Leary goes out, and I worked in prisons for 10 years as a volunteer and working with people and teaching and learning and doing a variety of other sort of prison reform work, because, so Leary goes out, and they do psilocybin work in groups. What they don't report in the original studies is that the facilitators, the Harvard graduate students and psychotherapists who went out there, also took the psilocybin. So they were just not adequately, they were sort of fudging their research on the recidivism rates from the trial, and then prisoners become sort of a protected class, so you don't do investigational drugs on vulnerable populations in the United States for very good reasons, right? So psychedelics as a response, the sort of renaissance in psychedelics is the most buttoned up research community you can imagine, I think, and for good reason, because there are pressures from regulatory bodies, there's pressures from the IRBs, the boards of oncology, and a desire among the researchers to use the most anodyne, white bread, standard RCT trial evidence base to do work with these completely strange, novel, weird, bending psychedelic substances. So if we can marry legitimacy with illegitimacy, perhaps we can get these research endeavors funded and get them through approvals. And I think there's some advantages to that, because the research base that's coming out is acceptable in the current sort of discourse. And my friends here who are anthropologists, I've met 5 of you. It's been we know that there are certain research methodologies that are not valued to the extent that other research methodologies are valued. So I don't know what that means in terms of the future of psychedelic research. And I do know that it makes it very expensive. I do know that it makes it less accessible. And I do know that it tends to control decision-making in the hands of fewer and fewer people. And there is some reason for that, because expertise is oftentimes owned by specific individuals, and there may be some very specific strategic reasons to pursue that line of research. And so I do not devalue it. In fact, I've been a part of teams that have created it, right? But I think that your question is incredibly important, and I think that we need to have a structural analysis of research generation, and to do so without that really doesn't understand the nature of how we create new knowledge in our world.
And move on to the next question.
Hi, my name is Maddie. I'm first off incredibly grateful, Pia and everyone that's organized this, all of the speakers. Obviously, it's a beautiful convergence of very many different kinds of people and thought that's been really valuable. But one thing that I'm kind of struggling with right now is that this feels very logical. This experience has felt very based in understanding and analyzing and sharing in English what we're finding. And there's so much that doesn't feel logical or rational or understandable about queerness or about psychedelics. When I'm high on shrooms, all that shit goes way out the window, and it's about my noises, it's about my body, it's about my feeling, it's about entering into the purest form of queerness, which is just naturalness, which is earth, which is everything. And what I'm questioning right now, what I'd really love to know, specifically from the people that shared in movement or in song or in something that wasn't retro-based, although it's beautiful that that's here, what would this convergence look like if it were high on shrooms? If it were queer, you know, like without the language that we're using, if we took out all of the speeches and the lectures that were had here, what would this space look and feel like? How would it make you feel if it were really based in that absolute, like, exiting from rationale and logic and entering into who the fuck knows?
It would look like all the parties that Eric was showing us in his presentation. Underneath all this is exactly what Eric was talking about. How did you decide the ongoing, whatever that is, the eternal party? Here's the thing about that, though. As all of us struggle with this, right? We have our subjective, beautiful experiences with psychedelics and plant medicine, right? But as facilitators or researchers or academics, what we want to do is understand to the degree that we can what's happening, why, so that we can apply it to the largest part of the population possible in terms of healing people. So for me, for someone who's always in more of the experiential realm, when I sit at a conference and just listening to the responses of all these beautiful people, I learn so much about the languaging of what we're doing, right? The distinctions. And as I was saying earlier, we don't have very developed language in the West to talk about these esoteric, quote unquote, spiritual experiences. But when we get together like this, that's what we're developing, right? So I hear what you're saying, but I feel like the whole point of a conference, right, and hearing all these different voices is that we're all training ourselves. We're learning about best practice. We're learning about what other people have learned. And I'm learning how to give language to some of the experiences that are real and powerful for me, but I may not necessarily be able to translate, right? And I'm also, more importantly for me is, you know, because I really want to help people, you know, I want to share something that you shared earlier. Eric, I think. No, sorry, Alex. I've shared this so often, and we all share this. Underneath everything we're doing is this commitment to the evolution of human consciousness, right? And that includes everything we're talking about, healing trauma, all of it. And the best way to do that is to constantly learn about best practices. What's working for other people? Well, what kind of language can we give to it? How do we homogenize the language in a way that most cultures and governments and regulatory bodies will be able to be on the same page and understand? So as much as I resonate with what you're saying, I feel like that's not necessarily what the conference is for. We have other experiences for that, including festivals and Burning Man and the ongoing eternal party. And when I come to conferences, I'm actually wanting to kind of move my psychedelic and beautiful journey experience more into the academic realm so that I can have better understanding about what I'm doing. Yeah.
I'd like to add something.
After He said, ooh. Try it. Try it with each other. Now, try it. Please, go. Do we even need the words? Do we even need the words?
I want to tie into that. Thank you for that. Thank you. Tying into that, it is where that coming together is, from the research to the experiential, experimental. And so, like, what it looks like is, hey, maybe there is a Zendo, maybe there is a cuddle puddle over there that's talking about existential occurrences. Maybe there is that dance movement, exercise, stretching, embodied movement with words. So actually, maybe some of the scientific realm or the research realm offers some words that maybe I don't know, and we turn it into embodied movement, because that's language revitalization in the indigenous community is really big. And I actually recognize Dancing Earth taught me how to do some breath work and stretch work with words, and it was parts of words. And then when you do the full movement together, you're creating a word, and that word is actually a traditional word for whoever offered that word from their community. So I brought that into ours, and when I say ama piritakawas, I actually go like, let's stretch and go ah, and then we go ah, and then I say ama, and everyone goes ama, and then I pire, and I make them dance, so they jump up and down, pire, and then I'm like pire tak, and we slap the ground, pire tak, and then ama, and then I go pire tak awa, so we do a last minute move, and then we do it all together, and I'm like, and you just said people of this land in movement and breath work and dance. And so tying that in, like, yes, the celebration of all of the parts, let's start researching unconferences. Those are really, really beautiful, because the same way that we want to get this into mainstream society, we also want mainstream society to meet us part way. And so I'm sitting here like when we were talking about normalization and futurisms of this. If we continue along the path of trying to do things the way that they've always been done, i.e. get it legalized through this path, through that way, where's the actual dreaming of the futurism? Like, we're following the constraints of what we're given to be like, if it were this way, and instead of just trying to follow those rules, we're like, operate in life like it's average and normal mainstream. Like the same way someone says, oh yeah, you want to go to the bar after this? Oh yeah, by the way, oh no, I'm gonna go hang out with my therapist. I'm gonna go hang out. I'm gonna go on a nice, lovely journey with psilocybin. I'm gonna go this, and it's normalized and natural. And what does that look like? What does that dream look like? Of course, it's hard to talk about it casually because of the legalities and all that fun stuff. But what does it feel like? What does it look like to just be like, if that were normal, a day in a life would be like this. And then the more talk about it, the more you find out, okay, we're pushed back in this area and this area. What does it mean to address those areas? So we're pushed back in people who don't know. Okay, that's education. So push back in the education. And then and all that fun stuff. So looking up unconferences to find out how to manifest some occurrences. So we're not just talking heads on a stage. So we're embodying stuff. So sometimes it's cuddle puddles or a dance off or sharing of art, or creating bits and pieces, or an interactive pieces like, what do we all want to talk about? Put a whole bunch of stickies on the wall, and then start non-hierarchically organized together, put them all in together and find out, okay, there's a cluster there, there's a cluster there, there's a cluster there. All right, if you don't know anything about that, and you might want to go that way, and yeah, you may have wanted to learn more, or you know a ton about, all right, you're someone who might facilitate that conversation, but then switch and go into another zone that you know nothing about. Because I met this individual, a year ago? Yeah. At Kamar, and it was Dance Mission Theater, where they put together like conversations about HIV, conversations about health, dance, imprisoned women with HIV, refugee conversations, documentation of elder story, of coming out, and then documenting stories with an elder who barely is barely voicing truth. I'm sitting here like, it's everything. It was a conference, it was a dance performance, it was invocation of ceremony, it was celebration of identity, it was scientific. There was someone who had a presentation about slavery that came to the United States, and it was all this really interactive data, and it wasn't just forms, and it wasn't just lines, and it wasn't just grids, but it was manifesting imagery, and he had it on repeat, and it was a performance. I was just like, that's freaking awesome. I'm like, you're educating me, but you're also hitting me on that level. So I was like really excited about those kind of fusions. And then another person had a musical bit, or a part where the audience announced like what color do you think of when you think of masculinity? And then people pop off colors. And then what color do you think of femininity? And pop off colors. And then he was recording it with his device, flipped it around, turned it into music, and then performed. I was like, that. It could be anything. So, both academic, apply in that direction, and then celebrate and find ways that we can get the mainstream can meet us part way.
To piggyback on what you're saying, just so no one interprets my vocalizations as defiance, the mushrooms, if they've taught me nothing else, is that there's room for it all. There's room for it all. Room for it all.
I love this question. I just have something to add. Coming from a background in theater, theater is something that takes just as much time to put on like an amazing theater piece as it does to put on a research project and come up with results. And I feel like this is kind of where those two worlds meet, which is why I'm so interested in being in this space. And then another thing to add is I remember in medical school, I was curious about research being done on what are the causes of people being gay or queerness. And having a mentor teach me that multiple studies and kind of lines of research had been shut down by queer activist organizations. And I was like, what? And, first of all, why do we need to know that? And second of all, if we have that information, can that be used against us? And so thinking about the mechanisms of why do psychedelics work? What are they doing? We have no idea. And at this point, personally, I'm not super interested in that. I'm more interested in using, the structures that we have in society, working within those to do these studies to convince the people that run those structures that psychedelics should be used for healing and not for harm. But I don't care how it works.
I want to say something to that too. Like what Chacruna is trying to do is a kind of balance, because if you think the very notion of psychedelic science is kind of highly contradictory, like psychedelic and then science. One thing is about deconstructing all categories and reinventing so many of the very language that we established to talk about these things, and then you have science. So that kind of tension has been inherent to the field of psychedelic science. Psychedelic science, if you study the history of it, it has always been this tension between ceremonial, like the people that came up with the word psychedelic, they were eating peyote with the Native Americans, and it's like, we didn't invent the wheel. Psychedelic science, there is this tension, this back and forth with underground and shamanic and the people work, and then there is this other dimension that is the science, and you can see that in all psychedelic science conferences. It's always this kind of almost schizophrenic mission to it. Like if you go to psychedelic science, the one we had here in California, you have like the underground is all the groovy people like kind of chilling, and then as it goes up, and you have all the scientists with all the ties. So that's kind of part of what our field is, and Chacruna is trying to navigate this tension. We are not like big clinical trials with big, biomedical research, but we're also not the more like progressive, underground, down to, the people thing. So we're trying to make this dialogue. This conference is exactly trying to grasp that tension. So we try to put here exactly this combination of perspectives of men, women, other genders, different sexualities and different nationalities, different accents, different methodologies, and more storytelling, but more science, but also, more poetics. So it's a challenge. We can do whatever we want. We can create whatever we want. It's up to us to create. I particularly don't want to do something super mega queer revolutionary, but I'm totally welcome anybody that wants to do. I don't feel that is my main mission. I want to remind that we're offering continuing education credits for this conference. And I don't know if you guys know how that works, but it's pretty bureaucratic and harsh. So, they outlaw a series of, I'm not going to say which because it's not polite, but, they outlaw, no, this one doesn't count, this one doesn't count, this one doesn't count, this counts, this counts. So why do we want continuing education credits? Because we're trying to do these mediations. It's awesome to come to these niche conferences that everybody applauses you every 3 seconds, and we're all between peers, but we're trying to reach also people that are not in our communities, that are more mainstream, and that think that these are like crazy hallucinogenic drugs that will make you see a pink elephant and throw yourself out of a window and die. We're trying to talk to those people as well, and then we're using the resources that we have in society. So we do believe in science, and we do believe in trying to do this mediation and this translation, because this beauty, this magic, those of us who love psychedelics, and I'm only here because I really, really like to take psychedelics, and that's why I started everything. We want to share with our naive brothers and sisters that are prejudiced and ignorant, that it's not like what they think. They have been misinformed. So we need to create mediations and bridges to make people understand. And this go through this formal language process and all these institutions. But I think it's about finding this balance, and it's also about, we have different branches, as Ariel was saying, and as Canyon was saying, there's not just one way. So I would love if a super radical thing comes out of this, and then, next time, you guys can invite me to go and sit in your conference or your unconference, and I'll just attend, and I didn't have to do any work for it, because, we want to create that. We hope you get together, and for us as organizers, that's our pleasure. Create things and invite us, and we're, one person, as Aline was saying, what she said in Portuguese, I wouldn't agree with you, it's too much English. Eu acho realmente cansativo, tanto inglês. E como a Aline estava falando em português, uma sobe e puxa a outra. Aline was saying, one of us, one woman, rise and pull up the other one. So, we're trying to create something, and people can, keep on the torch going. Oh.
I just want to let you know that I am going to be taking that on. I would like to create the unconference version of this in the woods, based in movement, based in art, based in music, with all of the academia, still a piece of it. So I'd like to invite you to that conference. Okay?
Hello. A thing that I've noticed generally is that I think everybody, I may be fucking that up, a lot of you have been referring to the substances as the medicine, and I'm curious about why the ritual and the information are not referred to as a medicine instead or along with that.
Can you repeat that, please? We're all saying, huh?
Oh, yes. Can you hear me better? Why is it that the substances are referred to as the medicine rather than the information or the ritual?
I don't know.
Well, partially, I think part of the ritual, within indigenous cultures and communities that I have observed, when I talk about medicine, it is part of the ritual. So I say medicine, but I don't say medicine ritual. So when I work with my medicine, this is my medicine. This is also my regalia. But it's not just its display. It's the occurrence of it being put together. It's the occurrence of me wearing it and charging it. It's the occurrence of everything that goes with it. So my medicine is here. And the same thing with my clapper stick, my salik, that music that is produced from it is medicine, but it as an item itself is medicine. And so I'm only speaking from my own indigenous community culture, but now I'm actually going to kind of question that.
Yeah, I wanted to talk something just slightly to the side, which is it's really interesting that we're using the word medicine at all. And I want to suggest that the reason that medicine has become the dominant term is because, kind of without us recognizing it exactly, it allows us to refer to two very different discourses, which is, as psychedelic science mainstreams, it uses healing, psychological maladies mostly as its sort of Trojan horse. So it's a medicine in a conventional psychological, psychopharmaceutical way. It's a medicine. And at the same time, we know that these, especially plant medicines, are deeply rooted in indigenous ways, and a lot of the deep healing that people are talking about at this conference are with plant substances. And so we recognize that within indigenous cultures, the term medicine has this much broader and less mechanistic sense, so that by saying medicine at all, we can kind of cover both sides. And so it's a really interesting term. But as for why people tend to refer to the material itself, I think that is mostly just represents Western materialism. It's just easier to think in thing language than in process language. And we do that all the time with people, with ideas, with everything. We tend to substantialize it as a thing that we can have and control and move around and consume, but that the process is harder to language often. So I think it's a really insightful question.
So just to add to that, I just want to say, so it's our work as observers as well to not get caught up in the nomenclature of all of this work, and to just be the medicine, right?
Piggyback off of what he just shared, that's my Korowa shaman. Someone who comes to a community, hears the word shaman, sees them doing some sort of tasks, and then all of a sudden they go around the world and they see those similar things, occurrences happening, and they go, oh, instead of me asking you what you identify as in your own community, I'm going to label you a shaman. Why can't we just say doctor, healer, or what they themselves call themselves? So when we say Native American shamanism, there are no such things as Native American shamans, because that's not our word. You can call us doctors, you can call us healers, medicine people, community members, but I have a problem with that. So I had to jump on that real quick.
At least in the tradition that I learned in the Peruvian Amazon, the ayahuasca medicine tradition, it's both. It is, la medicina is the plant itself, and then there's the practice of it, or the path of medicine, and they're both medicine, and fundamentally you're talking about plant spirit medicine. So you're working with the spirits of the plant, and that has a whole technology and tradition and way of communicating with them and working with them for healing purposes that is not just about drinking it. If you just drink it, that's a different thing. And so it's both, and just to reiterate that for them, they're doctors. These are jungle doctors. That's how they would describe themselves. This is the medicine of the jungle. This is what we did, what they'll say, not me, what we did before there was Western, hospitals and clinics, and they're still maintaining this tradition. So it's both.
And just quickly to add to that, I really truly believe that the medicine lies in the magic within yourself. And so in all the different aspects, in actually foresting or foraging the medicine and working with it yourself, you can begin to heal in so many different ways. So it's really important to bring that into the conversation, that the medicine is all around us and within us at the same time.
Thank you so much for all the shared wisdom you brought over this weekend. And kind of a two-parter. Obviously, generally, culturally, a lot of people have misconceptions about psychedelics, but especially in communities of color, there's also like the trauma from the war on drugs and other racist, hate and policies that were thrown. So I know a lot of people who are trying to bring psychedelics to their families or communities, and they're just hitting brick walls, and I certainly don't think I can really do much else. But I was wondering what an approach would be to people who have really been traumatized from the war on drugs and who have a lot of fear around psychedelics or misconceptions, and what an approach can be to kind of help them open up their minds or loosen that fear, or show them another way of seeing these plants, these medicines.
the best outreach, again, to go back, is to be the medicine. And so sometimes that means letting go of the vibration of wanting to help and wanting to like really just letting that completely go, and being a vibration that makes room for it all, being the mushroom, right? Being like ayahuasca, where nothing is rejected in those spaces. And if you can carry that vibration, then you are allowing something much more powerful to unfold in your experience that makes those people go, there's something about this person that gravitate them towards you without you having to do too much.
And I just want to point out that mushrooms are free and people can grow them easily. And you don't have to wait for a compass or maps or somebody to feed them to you. You can go get them and you can figure out how to serve them. It's easy.
And in my experience working with people like this, I really believe that, in the same way Kenyon said, that it's really just the emotion that you connect with the person. And going down to the simple fact that we all are beings experiencing the same things with different intensity and through different cycles in life. And so when you connect with people in that way and help them to understand that it's really just emotion that we're trying to clear and work with and befriend the things that we have been taught to hide and repress within ourselves, then it automatically begins to open people's minds up in a way that, because everyone truly wants to heal within their heart. They want to have the medicine, but there's just so many layers of blockages and walls that they have put up over time because for so many different reasons. So if you just tap into that core emotion and that core root of understanding, I think people will naturally resonate with that within themselves.
I want to add to that. For me, this is, I think, a little bit different from what I heard before, because I'm a very grounded person. I don't like to be out of conscious even for nothing. It's really difficult for me. And so I'm not talking only about like someone else, I'm talking about also myself. And for me, what is important was to know that I have an option. If I wanted to, I have this option, and this is not a problem at all. But if I don't want, I also cannot take, or I don't need to, I have to. I have a lot of options that I can take, and I can choose the one that I'm prepared for at this time, and maybe later I'm prepared for something else. And this can be psychedelics, and this can be therapy, and this can be yoga, I don't know, whatever. But I think what we really have to do is to be not moral judgmental on people. Like, I feel like judgment's really bad because block all the options we have, because we are with a lot of misconceptions and prejudice. And what I'm trying to show, and this is like for people who I really like, because people like in Brazil right now, like be a human rights person or really like don't have problems with transsexual people, or to believe that sexuality is fluid and everything. It's kind of hard, and this is crazy, right? So sometimes people start to talk about a lot of things about misconceptions they have, prejudice, war on drugs, and they just say, oh, do you know that I've smoked marijuana before and was this, like that, I was with someone, and just take the histories just to tell, like to connect to people and to start to give them storytelling. I really believe in storytelling, and to kind of try to disrupt these beliefs that people have, but also to understand that some people are not prepared, and I don't have to force them. And if they are not prepared, I just want to say to them, like, if you want to have this conversation one day, I'll be here. Like, I know people who know this well, and I can help you to go through this path, but if you're not prepared, I'm just not talking. So I'm trying to not force some people. It's just like this. If you connect, you are the medicine. I'm just trying to give people more options and to disconstruct the stereotypes.
Yeah, and so people's experiences are one thing, but I also think about geography, and I'm from Oklahoma. And, holding, any kind of psychedelic medicine space there really kind of freaks me out. I mean, it's one thing if it's held in the Bay Area or if in California, but there, it's very punitive about, there's a lot of, sure, stigma around it, but then the police, the law enforcement there can be very intense, even though recently medical marijuana has been passed, but they were very strict about that. Like you have to give up your Second Amendment rights to become a medical marijuana holder. You can never own a gun if you, in Oklahoma of all places, weird. So, it's like, what, how, don't you see that paradox that, anyway, so, yeah, so I get nervous if I'm even participating in medicine space. And so I've been fortunate to connect with, psychedelic medicine people who are Native American, who are mainly of the Shawnee tribe. And so they have sovereign land that we can go and that they lead. And so they also use like their own framework. And but that's the only way that I personally feel safe in Oklahoma if I'm on land that's already protected.
So the question was a little around the war on drugs, and so what do you guys think about the war on drugs? How are we doing with it? We're doing. Yeah. I mean, one of the concerns that I have around like resistance to psychedelics and the sort of war on drugs discourse is these horses used to be like tied, yoked together, and they're like, the psychedelic horse is like, we're going to do our own thing. Like, good luck with the rest of the decriminalization, legalization thing. And so in the earlier psychedelic movement, like, and we see this today too. I mean, that's obviously, I think, but there's been a strategic decoupling of the sort of like legalization vision for MDMA, like specific medicines, MDMA, psilocybin, regulatory approval within a regulated medical model with an approved licensed provider with specific regulatory structures around its provision and use. And then other Schedule I substances or more traditional drugs of abuse that like crack, cocaine, heroin, like just like, we used to be interested in like a national decriminalization movement like Portugal, and now we don't really see the psychedelic movement as interested in that. I think individuals are certainly, but a different tactic seems to have been adopted in the last 15 years. And I think that that's really problematic because, like, is anyone here like members from Students for Sensible Drug Policy from back in the day, or DPA? Yeah, so I mean, I see a lot of chapters. I started a chapter when I was very young, and we know that like, this is part of the problem around the racial discourse, because like the psychedelic privilege around whiteness is also around power and access to funding and money and access to healthcare, right? And we know that the massive incarceration in the United States, which disproportionately affects poor people, people of color across the board, and we in the United States are the biggest jailer in the world. We incarcerate more people than in any other nation on earth. We're the biggest jailer per capita, like bigger than any Middle Eastern nation, bigger than Russia, bigger than China. The people in our nation's prisons and immigration detention centers are disproportionately people who do not have access to power. We know that substance use was, the entire drug, for historical reasons, when Nixon signed the Controlled Substances Act in 1970, and the US Congress passed it. It was about quashing like the hippie movement, which is a counter-war and countercultural movement, and continuing the tradition of Jim Crow and the incarceration of African American and Black and brown people in our country. And like that arc and trajectory has gone completely unmitigated through multiple Democratic administrations. And so when we look around like drug legalization, decrim policy in the United States, and talk about psychedelics, like the decoupling is a little problematic. That might make sense for strategic reasons, but it doesn't address like this massive and complete, like we've been talking about policing, I think, in the national discourse for the last 4 or 5 years, a little bit more than we had in the past. But like we haven't even, and maybe ICE detention facilities, but haven't even like begun to talk about like the massive human housing project that goes on every day and night in America. And I think that that's essential. And I hope that this movement can keep that like deeply at the front of our platform.
I would just remind that while you were speaking, going back to kind of the core of your question, many years ago, a friend invited us to dinner at his house. He's Korean. And on above his fireplace was this huge photograph of his entire family, grandmother, uncles, they're all, and they were standing in this circle, candlelit, with all their arms around each other. And I go, whoa, that is so beautiful. And he goes, oh, thank you. We were all on MDMA. Yeah. Yeah, he had taken it at Burning Man, saw the healing potential for all the breakdowns and issues they were having in his family, and he invited them, and they all said yes, and he said it changed everything, and that picture was a result of it. So my response to that is, you never know. I wouldn't hesitate to try.
One thing is that, if you see the light, you want other people to see it. Showing that with your behavior, not with your words. This has been said before. I just want to reemphasize that point. Evangelism can work against you, but just showing, really walking the walk is helpful. I'll give the story briefly. My friend Todd, he shares this, so I'm going to say it here with you all. He's in recovery. He's been in recovery for 10 years. His family basically gave up on him from a part of the country that's really not into this. He's from the Ozarks. He spent a lot of time in prison, injection methamphetamine, opiates, benzos, alcohol, the whole thing. His family thought he was just going to be dead soon. He did too. And then on like the third time, trying to get sober, trying to go through the 12 steps, he also started drinking ayahuasca. And a few years later, his family said, who are you? What did you do with our son? Because he's been not drinking, not using. He got a job. He started taking care of himself, started taking care of his mom. And eventually his mother actually wanted to go sit in a ceremony with him. Now, she didn't convert. She didn't have to go start drinking ayahuasca all the time. She was at least open to learning about it because her son was saved. And it wasn't because he went around town telling everyone what he did. He would have probably gone to jail, given that he was on probation and living in that part of the country. He just took care of himself and did his work. And now he's helping other people who are in recovery trying to do that work too, but quietly and just with his actions and not so much with his words.
All right, I'm gonna move on to the next question in the interest of time.
Great. Hi, everybody. Fantastic conference. I love the complexity of the conversations that we've all been having. And last evening in our breakout session, can you guys hear me? Yeah. In our breakout session, we were talking about, queering psychedelics and how do we move that forward. And we really got to this point, well, it's difficult to have the conversations because psychedelics are illegal. And that has been a real, holding down the conversation, our ability to step into this space. And as the research is beginning to create a pathway toward sort of legitimizing of the use of psychedelics, one of the things that has been concerning to me is the framework in which the research gets conducted and the gatekeepers who provide the funding and create the paradigm for the structure of the research, and how much is actually getting disappeared through that lens. And I'm wondering if you all can comment on what do you think actually is disappearing from our conversation around the use of psychedelics and ayahuasca through these research paradigms and the gatekeepers, the funders, the organizations that are responsible and kind of are holding the keys to this kind of thing, and what we can do now, even though we're pushing for legitimization, we're going for, let's do it by the book so that we can prove that there's some value in this. What are we losing and what can we do to kind of minimize that loss as we move forward?
Keep the underground alive. It's actually kind of obvious. I went through this whole thing about compass pathways, and some of you might know this, some of you might not. But there was a nonprofit company that went out and was developing a form of psilocybin therapy, and they interface with a lot of therapists in the kind of open-hearted, open-minded, psychedelic science, old school kind of way. And then they turned on a dime and became a for-profit company and kind of broke a lot of those relationships and are clearly on a path for big bucks. And so this, caused some of us to get real wrangly about capitalism and moving into psychedelic science and dealing with, one of our most precious medicines. And I was getting really hot and bothered about it, like really pissed off, talking to all these people. And then I had this kind of weird thing. I was like, wait a second. They're free. They're easy to grow. The information's everywhere. Spores are totally easy to send around. I've been in the underground my whole life, since I was 13 years old. Yes, I have the privilege to not worry about the war of drug singing. That's a extremely important point in this. But within psychedelic space, within the sort of zones around these things, there's a room to keep a thriving black market going. And it's not the ideal solution to your question. Let's hope that the official science and the official discourse queers, and I think it inevitably will, because these things are really fucking weird. And at some point, you just got to go, whoa, this is just weirder than what I thought it was. It doesn't fit in my little medicine box in the Western sense of medicine. But as that's going on, let's not, forget our underground sides. And there's a risk there, but it's still a thriving part of our contemporary moment, and it doesn't mean we don't need to hand all of the authority and power over to mainstream scientific and regulatory processes. And mushrooms are a great example of that. Just keep spreading the spores. They got their own things to say. Just need a box in your closet, pretty easy.
So as someone who conducts conventional biomedical research in this area, I want to say that there are obviously top-down structures that inform the work that gets done and that does not get done. But there's always pressure that is bottom-up in any kind of good conventional medical research. I see that a lot in my colleagues who are clinicians, maybe clinician researchers, who go out and learn about cannabis because patients come in and say, should I use this? What is this? I am using this. Did you know that this is helping me with this that you were trying to help me with? And then their physicians and hopefully the researchers are also seeing what the community does and learning from that. I think there's actually been a lot of good research that came out of seeing what the community had already figured out. And then these really brilliant scientists just went and tested it, and they found that it works, okay? And it doesn't always in these tests, but sometimes they come to these conclusions based off of knowledge that is sourced by the community. So if you want to go to your healthcare providers and say, do I have a psilocybin deficiency? Or should I be getting... should I be getting psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy for my PTSD? I've done the evidence-based therapy. I've tried SSRIs. Things haven't worked. What's next? Have you read that latest paper about this? And ask the medical community to be responsive to your questions. That's how we're going to start to fill some of these gaps.
I was just going to parallel on that bottom up. I myself in the indigenous community, making reference because not fluent in this environment, but like with grants, when they want the reporting, when they want the metrics, there's a lot of qualitative data and quantitative data, and sometimes you can't validate how important it is to a ceremony or community because like our metrics aren't fully there when it comes to like, yes, 20 people showed up to an event, which is huge when it comes to the tiny little community of this tiny little area of this urban area. But when you say this is huge in this way and you tell that story, you tell them, and it's that bottom-up method. And so I'm really happy he put better words to it. But setting those standards by voicing the need and by saying these are also considerations. That's why it's frustrating when you see surveys when they get turned into data like awesome, amazing graphics, when they're like, oh, only these questions were asked. It's like, okay, and what if those other ones were? We would probably see a cool little spike here or there. And so encouraging, like doing the fundamental research where your paper's going, but then adding a few more for maybe your secondary level of deep dive down. And so setting that standard up and then pushing back in those environments, because the same thing with supply and demand when it comes to products. Well, you set the standard, and the pushback of that up at top is a way to encourage them to shift. So yeah, thank you.
I think I don't have a whole lot of contribution in this area, but what I would think may be getting lost in the lens of private funding or certain funding in these research studies is maybe the historical aspect of it. You know, the education of the people and the substance that you're taking, and that education, how important that is. How does that energy work with the medicine and the whole experience for the participant in it? And even though I see that there's a lot of effort being done so that there is a sacred component, whether that be like flowers or a water bowl or something of that nature, or crystals. But I think the education of the history and the land and the indigenous ancient wisdom is like primarily important, that may be getting lost in these studies.
Thank you.
We've got about 10 more minutes, and I've got at least 2 more questions over here I want to get in before we wrap up, so it's okay if we move on.
Hi, my name's Sean. I just want to thank everyone for such a knockout event over the last 2 days. It's been really impressive. Alex, your point about the Portugal model and commenting on SSDP and legalization of all drugs. I've recently gotten the opportunity to work closely with SSDP, some of the people in charge of SSDP in my home city of Pittsburgh. And everyone here should be paying attention to what they're doing. There's some really, really impressive young people. And recently, Denver decriminalized psilocybin mushrooms, and there was a lot of criticism following that online and things like that. The conversation sort of erupted. And I myself learned from the SSD peers a great deal about what they call psychedelic exceptionalism. And I just want to thank you for pointing out everything that you did in your comment just a minute ago. But my response to them too, and I'll ask you and I'll ask everyone here, is if you have considered whether or not, and not to diminish the efforts of those in Denver and elsewhere, but if you have considered whether or not the mushrooms are decriminalizing themselves.
I don't know exactly what to say to that. I mean, I'm clapping, it's awesome. But there definitely is obviously a widespread intelligence among these plant medicines and the spirit of the land and the culture and the medicine itself. So that, in my opinion, would be definitely a possibility. There's a higher intelligence to it all, right? So that'd be my answer.
I'd like to say something about that. If I can include other plants, fungi, and even amphetamine medicine to all that, that I also agree that there is a greater intelligence to them. I think that's why we're attracted to them. That's why we call them la medicina, the medicine, because they are plant teachers. I would like to put it out there that the phenomenon of like ayahuasca tourism and all this, kind of like monopolizing of certain territories within, like, let's say Iquitos, all these outsiders buying land and all these European people going there and all that stuff. I really wonder if the medicine is actually attracting this population and actually making it appealing in whatever way they are attracted to it. Like in history, we've always kind of prized know thyself as like the biggest thing. And perhaps these people that have a lot of money and privilege to travel all the way down there and buy land and to have all of these fancy resorts, perhaps the plant is calling them, and perhaps the plant is making it appealing to them, just like, not to get too like esoteric in there, but too late. Imagine the way that an orchid can kind of mimic the scent of a wasp for it to mate with it. And then it gets all full of the pollen, trying to hump the flower. And it's like, what? That's not working. So it goes to another one and another one and another one. So it's pollinating. So, one species is using another so that it can, propagate, but so that it can carry on its most important function, if you will. So maybe ayahuasca and the other substances are removing themselves from access because maybe we're not ready, because maybe we will do something else that it itself does not want. So maybe ayahuasca is just saying, okay, you are the ones that are like bombing everybody. I mean, I really don't think it's like, brown women that are out there. So let's start wars. So let's consider that the intelligence of these substances are actually perhaps doing exactly what it wants it to do. And here we are having these conversations that perhaps are not as important as whatever the plant is really doing when we are actually taking it. Just a thought.
Yeah, and just to add on to what you said, that just another piece of that is that a lot of deforestation in Amazon is from cattle farming. And I know of Aya Healing Retreats, which is a retreat center I work with. They are on a reclaimed cattle farm, and they're building up the flora and fauna that's indigenous there back again. It's adjacent to the Amazon. So I do hear what you're saying about, I struggle with my own around participation in this medicine, but if you want to save the rainforest, stop eating meat.
But very briefly, I want to quote one of my indigenous elders, a British white guy called Alan Watts. And he questioned whether an oak tree spreads itself via acorns, or acorns spread themselves via oak trees.
Hello. So I found really intriguing about Alex's talk was about all the research questions that he brought up, especially about psychedelics and attachment theory. So I was wondering, what are some other research questions that you're all curious about that haven't been done yet?
I guess I'll pick up one that sort of ties into what was just said, which is I'm really interested in the phenomenon of the perception of agency or of interpersonal relations with the phenomena. So whether you're having a vision, at what point do you have the distinct, completely obvious perception that you're in a relationship with an agent that is intelligent, that is communicating to you, maybe through a vision, maybe through a message, maybe through language, maybe through none of those. But there are certain cues or conditions that sort of support that and some things that don't. And so it's very qualitative and sort of, it's along the lines of Alexander's talk about that the sort of idea of religious experience that's been inscribed into conventional research is very, very slanted towards this kind of unitive mysticism. And it's the other more interactive, pagan, earthy, weird creatures, entities, dimensions. That stuff is a lot more interesting to me. It's very squirrely stuff, but I think focusing in on the sense of agency and interactivity, when that happens, what do people make of it? How does it unfold over time? How, those kinds of questions in a really deep, broad, qualitative way would be pretty fascinating, because I think that phenomena relates to this question about the agency of the plants themselves in a very intimate way.
So I'll conjure up somebody who's been out of fashion for many, many years for good reasons, Sigmund Freud, who had this idea that there were two main driving forces in humans or human psyches, and one was a drive towards sex or love or procreation or connection or attachment, and one was a drive towards death or non-existence. And as far as research, one of the things that was mentioned earlier was something about the great shadow of psychedelics having to do in part with sexual wounding. One other aspect of the shadow is just about sexuality and how we come into like our fully embodied sexual selves, and what role medicines might play, what role ceremonies might play in all that, kind of like a reclaiming of a kind of positive or orgiastic experience of being alive. And the other is to piggyback on something that Alex said a little while ago up here that I really resonated with, and it's this idea that, we're headed towards this collective ecological calamity from our very human point of view. The earth is probably going to continue whether we're here or not. And so what it means to be in a more profound state of listening around simply what the medicines have to say about the place that we have created and arrived at in all of its problems and complexities. So I think some, research around exploring this notion of climate change under the influence of some of the medicines and what that might mean. So thanks.
Because I'm not in you guys' world, so one of you guys are gonna have to take it on because I'm gonna be singing a song of Shaking the Rattle instead. Epigenetic trauma, how ayahuasca can help alleviate the effects of cultural genocide of the indigenous population. A study.
I have a
It's not a new one, apparently. Sorry, guys. Best I got for you.
I think that we're really in the infancy, adolescent stage. I could imagine, we talked about attachment, but I could imagine if we had nearly infinite resources, a program of study, a rich and varied multi-site program of study where we took just to start conventionally, every DSM diagnosis, like all the scores of them, not just depression or PTSD like we have for psilocybin and for MDMA, but all of like gender identities, gender dysphoria, and a variety of other things that affect the entire DSM, like take everything out and then lay it up against every single type of psychedelic medicine, right? Ayahuasca, DMT, 5-MeO-DMT, ketamine-assisted therapy, and then your standard serotonergics. And then we get into the Shulgin compounds, right? And the sort of other traditional medicines. And then take that and then pull it out forward into a 3-dimensional cube where you're taking every population, right? So you're not just working with primarily white sampled studies, but like you're working with people around the world of every color, of every race, of every gender expression, of every sexuality. And so you have like this massive number of permutations. And then you start to get into like combinatorial therapy. Like why couldn't we do psilocybin, traditional psilocybin therapy like we've seen at Hopkins and NYU and UCLA, and combine it with group therapy with oxytocin? I think it's like a fantastic potential combinatorial study. And that's in parallel or in serial, not even in combination. Like, I don't know this is a great word, but candy flipping. Like it's very powerful to combine. We have some fans of candy flipping in the audience. We are so surprised. It's so powerful to combine to do combinatorial medication, right? So like, to use that language, but to combine a classical serotonergic psychedelic with MDMA or with methylone or some of these other things. And then finally, like the other medicines question, right? So like we are a convergence, this room, psychonauts and psychedelic researchers and scientists and queer folk are a convergence, but like, my training has been in in two different lineages of yoga. And I think that like the idea that like we get people come in, like we put them in the Hubbard room or, you know, a room that's like derived from different types of indigenous practice, close your eyes, go into the music, play pre-recorded music. But I believe, like, and if you read the writings of Sri Ramakrishna, like when you enter into a particular mudra and position, like there are specific changes in consciousness that happen, and that the idea that like our patients should just like lie on the bed is like maybe like zero order level of psychedelic practice. It's like we're gonna hold the space and help you to the bathroom and then just go in. And I think. But that's like taking the infant and like, here's the ocean, and like walk around and hold your hand, don't fall in and get too wet, right? But eventually we all learn to become seafarers. And like, how do you, like, what are all the stages of that? And I do believe that we have a lot to learn from different indigenous communities, but I do believe that the other wisdom traditions of the world, the combinatorial medicines of mudra, mantra, group practice, Sufi zikr circle, the dance, like these are practices. And we had an entire 2-day conference on queer psychedelics and didn't talk about like body mortification and BDSM queer practices, except for one mention of the... These medicines are powerful both in their own right and in combination with psychedelic consciousness. And I think that like the idea that we would design a research program, it just stretches, it just stretches forward. And it's really quite beautiful. And I'd be curious to see where that goes. So thank you for asking.
Granted, I'm not a researcher, but how many psychedelic drugs will it take for us to step away from our entitlement, exploitation, commodification, consumer nation, and our expectation of feeling entitled to everything? To break down that paradigm of having access, or like when it's saying like mainstream, like let's say industrial model wanting to make sure the chemical compound is perfectly exactly the same, like all the chicken nuggets taste exactly the same at every freaking store. The same thing, we need to make sure the dose is exactly the same, so instead of allowing it to grow naturally, and maybe some don't have that, maybe some do, maybe some are extra doses, or maybe when you take it, it tells you no, and you're not entitled to it. You're like, how many drugs is it gonna take for people to realize that? So I'm wondering if any research is happening that it wakes up that paradigm. And so I would love the studies to explore how it can help kids, how it can help all of these amazing things, but also breaking down what we're naturally doing right now, because I'm thinking right now we're spending a lot of energy together in community, like thinking and pontificating and working in our silos, and I'm looking back to indigenous communities, like their stewardship to the land and responsibility was really, really strong. And right here, right now, some of us are doing a lot of amazing work. And I've also fallen down this trope of slipping up, like, okay, at home, I have the, if it's yellow, let it mellow, if it's brown, fetch it down. Yet when I come to events like this, I don't practice that because it's not normal. But don't we care about the water? Are we being accountable to it? Or same thing, is recycling, composting available? So what I'm trying to say is, like, are we working it all the time? Are we becoming complacent in some areas? And so when will that kind of wake up? And so I'm kind of curious as to when the studies are going to start pointing out some of our entitlements or questioning, and just encourage us to be more introspective on some of our behaviors. And then, of course, accountability to the other community members. Because, like, yeah, we're all amazing and helping, and we need to be loving and helpful to each other and patient with each other along our healing journeys, because we can't be perfect the first time around. And then how do we help the rest of the community get on board? So not quite the missionary theory, but maybe some sort of exploration towards that direction.
All right, let's have Dee, and then we'll wrap this one up.
Yeah, I mean, I would be interested to see, I don't know which medicine it would be, but the effects of psilocybin or ayahuasca to support people in their gender transition. Would it reduce dysphoria? Would it allow for a more smoother transition? Ayahuasca certainly helped with that. For me, psilocybin has also been very helpful for that as well. So that's something that I would be curious about. And transition, that's a very vague word, right? It can take, many, 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 many years. But if you wanted to hone it down, so maybe people who are, already on HRT or on that path might be a good research question.
All right. Thank you all. But before we go, one sort of final observation and one final question as well. We've had an incredible, diverse array of talent and wisdom, both on the stage and in the audience. So I want to invite all of you who are on the stage, if you're so moved, to share something that you learned from either from someone else on the stage, that you learned from the audience, or that you learned from an informal conversation that perhaps happened outside or over lunch.
Mine is that we all have a perspective that is unique and individual to ourselves and is valid in its own right and authentic as well. So it's important to make those contributions known and to connect and share with each other so that we can create change within this field.
I think it's not something that I learned, but it's more of an affirmation of knowing that like everyone can be a teacher to someone else, and there's wisdom in each and every one of you, and that everyone deserves to be heard. So it was nice to have some conversations outside of this theater with some of you guys too, and everyone.
On my way here this morning, I stopped off at Phil's for coffee over on Folsom and 24th. And so I was chatting with the person giving me my Jacob's Wonder Bar, and said, "What are you doing today?" And I said, "Oh, I'm coming to Queering Psychedelics." And they said, "Oh, I would have gone to that too, but I have to work." So I think one of the things that I'm ongoingly learning is how big this thing is that is happening. And yeah, so I don't know where to go with that, but there's a lot of people out there that would have been in here.
I learned that, I think his name is Bob. He has a plant table outside. I learned that, wow, a love for plants can really just, I can't even find the right words for it, but he gave me a little cutling of Salvia divinorum, and I've had a relationship with that plant for quite some time. I don't really talk about it too much because it's not one of the more popular ones. And it was in the exchange of that gift that I realized how much love it took to get us all here into this room. So I learned again, and we already know this, that giving is such a beautiful act of love, and that's gonna be my takeaway from this.
My takeaway is all of you. I feel like I really got to know people better at this event, both people that I've known for a really, really long time, and also meeting people for the first time and just hearing stories. And I'm definitely taking those stories into my heart and with me, and taking your contacts, and I will follow up.
This is something that I learned, but something I was really reflecting on last night when you were sharing how here's this person who's leading people through healing at this center or whatever, yet said to you that you should, I think he said you should go ahead and add P on the end of all those things for pedophilia. And the thing really is something that comes up often is like this idea that plant medicines and psychedelics are not panaceas. They don't lead to instant enlightenment, right? And that there's people that have been drinking it for years, gallons and gallons and gallons of ayahuasca, and can still make a statement like that, Yeah, so for me, I was really struck by that. And I thought, I think the thing that came up for me in that is a reminder for myself that as profound and beautiful as these sacraments, medicines have been in my own life, and I've seen it, unfold in so many other lives, that it's still in the handle and the care and the facilitation, and the context. Because we've also met people that, like I said, have been drinking for many, many years, and as my friend says, are as big as assholes as they were as they started. Yeah. So I'm leaving questioning that again. Like, how can this person be drinking that often and make a statement like that? It's fascinating to me.
I have learned just the devotion that people can have, very specifically to the volunteers of yesterday and today. I was the person that went through every email to determine whether or not they fit the criteria that Chacruna set, which was financial need, person of color, LGBTQ, etc. And just reading each and every one was such an experience. And I felt like I got to bond, even if it was one way and they just got to reply back, yeah, you got it. I just really was impressed with the emotional intelligence of everyone who just shared their story briefly about why they would like to come and how they could not afford it. But it was just such a generous giving of themselves to say, can you help? And the fact that they have been holding everything together, these like invisible little angels with the blue shirts. And I just feel so grateful. So thank you.
My takeaway is sharing is caring, but in that, when it comes to the in-betweens, because I think I probably had a few conversations off on the side of when it comes to, Via perfectly stated it yesterday. I'm like, you should have made that as one of the clips when first hearing about queer and psychedelics. Like, what are you gonna do? Just talk about like, yeah, I'm queer and I'm this and I really like to do this. And I really love that because that is a potential icebreaker for those who may not be as conscious or curious or open-minded to take that step to come into circles like these. And so remembering there's in-betweens and remembering that sometimes it is a scary space to be in because, of course, that's immediately you might be impacted of an affront of other sides. At the same time, there's a deep need because then the polarizing. So as a two-spirited individual thinking about if I'm just going to go along the binary, if we have the women fighting with the men and neither of them can come to a compromise, it's our two-spirited community of the in-between to find the empathy to understand both sides to then help convey and translate even some of those slightly foreign concepts to the other side and then attempt to find the middle ground. So just an encouragement for when we're struggling like, oh, they're not doing that good enough. Well, okay. One, how do we encourage them to learn good enough? But also, what is making us come to the conclusion of not good enough by comparison to if it's not there anywhere? So just the in-betweens of everything. So the beauty of that and opening and reminding people that if you can put yourself in that space, like be part of that conduit.
I think having a safe space to convene is so important, and the turnout to this conference shows that. And so I'm really happy that I learned about and can tell people that there will be something called Queer Dome.
I learned this lesson over and over and over again, just how connected we all are, and that everybody here is working in different methodologies and different realms to push the public consciousness forward. And I just want to say, Bia, thank you, and everybody Clancy, everybody who contributes to Chacruna. I feel like you're such a much needed bridge and the heart and the conscience of the psychedelic renaissance.
For me, I've learnt that there is a beautiful transatlantic community of friends. And I've just experienced that really personally. It's been a very powerful experience. I want to shout out to Ken, who's hosted me and my boyfriend Chris over there for the last 4 days and gone out of his way to shower us with love and care. So, he'd never met us before. And, I'm in a strange town and it's crazy. But just the welcome and the love that everyone has shown us here, me and Chris, is fabulous and very, very humbling. Thank you.
Yeah, I learned that you all are up to really big things, and I'm glad to be a part of it and share what I've been thinking. And yeah, I learned that there's a lot of, I thought I was so alone in this work as a queer person, and now I know I'm for sure not. So yeah, thank you for that.
So I just wanted to say that for me, I learned that you can have an idea and turn it into a dream and then make it happen. And I just want to say I also was so proud of Bia for all that she's done, and also for coming out of the closet the way she did. It's very great. So.
I really enjoyed a lot the weekend. I always enjoy everyone's outfit. You all look amazing. The hair, the voice, the accents, and everything. And I feel, I'm a lawyer, so you see that this is a lot for me. Just see different people, because I don't know what's happened. In the end of the school, they all look the same. I don't know what they do with these people in law school. But anyway, and I feel very peaceful. And I have a lot of things to do in Brazil. I'm going back to finish my Ph.D. and I was like, I had really terrible days because I was finishing my master. I finished May 17. My parents are come, my mom got sick. I have a conference to do. I was going like, this is my fourth city in United States, maybe in 1 week. And I was so stressed. I was so peaceful that I even slept in the cold. So I just want to say thank you, because apart from everything I listened, and this was really important, I think this piece I'm going like to do, I'm taking with me to do all the things I have to do now. It's really something that I'm taking away from here. And this is really big for me because I'm a very anxious person. And it's just really good for me that I'm not on medicine. I mean, I'm in Nick pills, but in Vic pills, but that I'm really peaceful. This is very important to me. So I want to say thank you.
Well, everybody's talking, and I'll just say that I learned that it's difficult to be a straight white guy and to take on the burden of relating histories to folks, and that I know I'm not pulling the fragile white guy card. I'm just stating a fact. This is what I learned. But that even though I make mistakes, and perhaps made some mistakes about my mistakes, that it was worth it.
I just want to say I had this crazy idea that it might be fun to have a psychedelic conference on the East Coast, and I have just been totally humbled by what you and your team and Alex and Clancy have done here, and humbled, and also just like just total gratitude for all of the effort. I know some of it is rewarded and much of it is often not, and I just want to recognize that, and I'm seeing that, and I really deeply appreciate it. So thank you. Yeah. I just going to say one other thing. My takeaway is that I've often, I think as queer people, we straddle the Colossus of Rhodes, and in psychedelic spaces, I'm often the diplomat for queerness. And in queer spaces, I'm often the diplomat for psychedelic medicine. And it's just nice not to have to do all of that translating all the time.
I would say the two main things I learned from this whole experience of just being involved in this conference is the incredible diversity in how the queer community relates to psychedelics. I mean, everybody I've talked to, different ways, different philosophies, different practices, it's incredible, frankly. I come from kind of one little world, and there's 1,000 other worlds of working with psychedelics in one way or another. And then the other is just the power of coming together as a community. I've never been part of an event or an experience where so much of me was felt part of it. My sexuality, my interest in psychedelics, and interest in community, and really feeling that with so many of you. I mean, I just feel like so many little conversations and chit chats. And so I also just want to thank everyone who came. Thank you so much for being here. You guys made this conference, so thank you very much.
All right. Yes. Final word. Yes. As Dee said, it's wonderful to know we're not alone. This has been really wonderful. It's been a little bit like being at Comfort and Joy, but without the dust. So I really enjoyed that. So if everybody on stage can stay here, we're gonna get you all gathered and take a photo. Yes, we're gonna stand. Yeah. You can get up, move the chairs back, get together.
What's that? Still a little bit, yeah.
I'd like to invite the Chacruna team to come on stage for a final thank. So.
I can post it on the Chacruna Instagram.
Hello, everybody. We're going to say some final thank you and some final words to close our conference. So if you bear with us, it's important to us. I would like to just first of all really thank and acknowledge Alex, who's been the great force. Horacio is my personal assistant for 4 years and came all the way from Mexico.
We also want to thank the Brava Theater and just share a little bit about the history. There's a reason why we picked this particular location along with the fabulous setting, is the history. This was a nonprofit by women, for women in the arts organization where they bought this theater over 30 years ago, and it was a film theater, and rehabbed it completely, turned it into what it is, and to this day, still a nonprofit run by women, and they are specifically supporting women in the arts and LGBTQ communities, and you can see that in the all the handouts out there that are the events that they're doing this month. So thank you to the Brava Theater. It's actually a very special place, and thank you.
I'd like to ask the volunteers to stand up if they can, the volunteers that are around. Thank you for being volunteers in our program. So I have been kind of since the age from 10 to 26, I participate in a youth organization, kind of like a peace organization, kind of Girl Scout kind of thing. So I continue to be in the spirit. I really like teamwork. I want to thank all our team here and ask us to make a big hug for a photo for us. Yeah. This is the Chacruna team that is here. Can you make a photo, somebody that is not from Chacruna? I want to really thank. Yeah, just want to mention that, we have part of our team is not here. Part of our team is in the World Ayahuasca Conference, where we're handing out 500 booklets in Spanish and 500 booklets in English, which is the guidelines for raising awareness around sexual abuse in ayahuasca underground circles. And we're doing that work, and it's all free. We're handing that for free. We have 3 people over there, and we just translated these guidelines to 4 languages, and they're available for free. And we're sending one person of our team to Iquitos to visit retreat centers and stakeholders and tourism agencies and restaurants and people involved in this. We have a series of programs I'm going to list very fast. So we have the Ayahuasca Community Committee. We have the Council for the Protection of Sacred Plants that we're trying to look into advocacy and protection of plants. That includes also the conservation dimension. One branch of that work is a work called the Peyote Files. It's a documentary. My co-director, Nick Spears, is here with me. We're trying to look for launching this little documentary series in the fall here in the Bay. And we have the Psychedelic Therapy Music Forum, which is led by River. And we have also the Chacruna Chronicles, which is, we have put in the last 2 years more than 100 articles for free online. So we are entirely volunteer organization. I want to remark that none of us have a salary except Horacio, which I pay out of my work in other in other areas. It's not Chacruna funded, it's personally funded by my work outside of Chacruna. So we are all volunteers, and I would like to share and to ask for your solidarity. If you feel compelled to support our mission, we're really trying to figure out how to make this sustainable and be ethical and be cool and be inclusive and be diverse and be accommodating of all different people. But it's hard because there is no institutional funding. Even for the Peyote Files, I've reached out for more than 10 funders, and we couldn't get it done, couldn't get it funded. All the articles we put out are free. We have studied methodologies. Let's charge for the articles. Let's make a membership. Let's put ads. I have this problem that I'm kind of like a stubborn hippie anthropologist, and that is not so easy in the Bay Area these days because it's so expensive. So we're really looking for support for funders. If you feel, that we're doing a good job and want to help think of ways or donate, we have a donate button in our site. We also have a newsletter that you can join for free. And we have a series of flyers and stickers that are out there. And I want to encourage you, I'm going to change the Facebook setting of this group. So we can, we don't have something concrete that we want to say, let's do this next. But one thing that we're going to do is invite you to keep connected through the Facebook page of the site, because this is something that we already have. So people have not been posting there much. I would encourage them to keep on tuned. I would like to ask all the speakers to be really nice and write down your presentation so we can make a very cool special edition of queer issues. And people asked for help for volunteering for the Queer Dome. I also want to encourage that. And also, if you feel you want to volunteer, and just, I'm going to make a little joke that my other friends make. If you want to help in the psychedelic community and you feel this call and this vision and you just want to participate, we got a lot of psychologists and a lot of masseuses and anthropologists, but we also need like some real business people that know how to deal with Excel tables and make, dollars. And we really need funding and support in this area. So that's also, if you're divided and you feel you have talents, you can join this movement by being a philanthropist and a donor, or somebody with business vision that can help people like us to, be sustainable and grow big. So thank you very much. Thank you, Brava, and thank you all. And let's keep on connected. Yeah. The conference videos will be posted sometime soon for free. Thank you.